minutes to come in from the lobby over there, and then we'll get started. And my presentation is not it's not an hour long or anything, so we'll go through it and will be time for questions, and we should wrap up at the hour. All right, that's good. All right, well, let's get started. Anyone else who's late, I guess we'll just have to figure it out. So thank you all so much for being here. Again, this is the Ronde webinar, Effective Leadership, What You Really Need to Know. And go ahead and go to the next slide there, Carrie. There we go. So I want to start today by telling you all a quick story. I, many years ago, got to go with three of my kids to the safari park in La Jolla. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's a really cool place to go see animals. It's the least zoo of all the zoos I've ever been to. Most of the animals are sort of running around free, except for the predators. They're still semi-free, but they're not in little cages. So it was a cool place to go. But we got to stay overnight in this really cool program called Roar and Snore. And at night, after the park was closed, we were around the fire, and scientists were bringing out animals for the kids and the parents to look at and to talk about, to learn. And it was really a fun experience, except for that moment when I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning when the lions were roaring and I forgot where I was. That part was a little jarring. But aside from that, we had a really good time. And so they brought out this little creature called a jerboa. And jerboas have these kind of floppy ears that look kind of like a rabbit, and they kind of have these big hind legs that kind of look like a kangaroo or some sort of a marsupial. And they asked everybody, what do you think this is? And everyone said it's a rabbit, or they said it's a kangaroo, right? They all said the same thing. I think there was one parent who made a bad joke about a kangaroo and a rabbit getting together, but everyone was so just clear. They were so adamant that they knew what the answer was. And the scientist said something that has stuck with me forever and really impacted me as a leader, because what they said was the human brain problem. When we are presented with something new, when we're given new information, something we've never seen before, our brain wants to take things that we know and somehow use that to explain what it is we're seeing for the first time. We don't say, I don't know. We don't say, this must be new. We say, well, I see rabbit ears and I see kind of kangaroo legs. It must be something like that. And so the light bulb in my brain went off when I realized why sometimes we have trouble communicating with employees, helping employees understand our vision, maybe having alignment with our staff, or really connecting with certain people. They don't know what we know. They can't see what we're seeing. And so if they don't have the information, if they don't know what we know, if we're not all on the same page, they're taking data from their experiences, they're taking things in their brain to somehow explain something new, explain an experience that they don't understand or they don't like. And so a great example of this might be if I came in grumpy one day and they don't know that I haven't had my coffee, as Ken and I were talking about earlier, they could easily say, well, you must hate me. You must not like me. Or maybe there's a problem. Maybe I have a mean boss, right? Or wherever it is. If they don't know that it's just, I need my morning coffee before I get going, and they could make an assumption. Now, that's a very simple example. When we get into very complex issues, it's very easy for us to forget that we have to share more, we have to be more transparent, we have to provide more for our people in order to be great leaders. So I'm going to talk today about some of these brain tricks, some of these things that are happening that we need to be really cognizant of as leaders, that we need to help our people understand, that we can use to understand people better, and also use to help motivate and challenge and help people around us grow and be better leaders. So go ahead and click next, Carrie. So we have to remember that we don't know what we don't know. You can keep going there, Carrie. We want to make sure that we are being really cognizant of confirmation bias. If you don't know what that is, you probably know it as by its most famous term, which is social media, which is we only listen to the data that we agree with, right? If you like to go hang out with people who think the way you think, and you only think about data or facts that support your opinion, and you ignore all the ones that don't, that's called confirmation bias. And so it's very easy for people, if they think you don't like them, as my previous example, they're only going to hear the things that reinforce that and ignore the things that don't. And then we want to make sure that we're going to lead with bad news. That people tend to, we want to start with the hard stuff and end with the good stuff. I'm going to talk a bit more about that a little bit later. But it's really important we think about eliminating that crap sandwich, right? We don't want to go good news, bad news, good news. Okay, next slide. So all of this is framed through what I call my 7 pillars of cultural success. And usually when we're a problem as a leader, there's some area or more than one area that we really need to focus on getting better. Transparency, positivity, measuring things better, focusing on what makes us unique, making sure we're recognizing our people, being good listeners, and then having a healthy and good way to deal with mistakes so that we can grow and learn from them. Next slide. These are some of the companies I've worked with. We can go to the next slide on that. But I always like to start most of my presentations with a reminder of Daniel Pink's work. So before we get into the more advanced things, we have to make sure from a foundational standpoint that we have these things thought about and dealt with in our organization. Do our people feel like they have the autonomy to get their job done? Do they feel like they understand what the boundaries are, where they're allowed to go and be creative and think about ways of doing things the way they want to get them done, and that we're not micromanaging people? Do they have mastery? Do they have opportunities at work or in their life somewhere to learn something new? And this is really important part of what makes employees happy, is that they have autonomy and they have some mastery somewhere in their life, and they are connected to our company's purpose, why it is we exist, not to make money, but what is the grander reason, the why, as Simon Sinek would call it. If they understand those things, then they have the ability to be able to be happy at work. Next slide. And then we have to connect all of this to our BHAG. And I don't know if anyone has read the book in a while, but Good to Great by Jim Collins. He talks about the big, hairy, audacious goal. If we want people in our organization to be connected and want to learn and want to get better for what we're doing, they have to understand where we're going. What is the really big goal for the organization? Are we trying to get to 1 million? Are we trying to get to 15 million? Are we trying to, become the biggest, baddest publicly traded company in the world in this space? What is the big goal that we're trying to achieve? They don't understand that big goal, and only senior management knows that goal. It's really hard for the average person to understand why we're making the decisions that we're making every day. They don't know where that ship is headed. Next slide. One more there. I think we have one more click. There we go. So what are some of the cognitive biases? What are some of the things we can think about to help us be better leaders? The first one is to make sure we understand the fundamental attribution error. So what is this? I'll give you a simple example. If you were walking down the street and someone bumped into you, they were on their cell phone, and they knocked everything out of your hands, and they just kept walking, and they didn't say they were sorry, they didn't even acknowledge you. Well, what happens is we tend to look at them what we can observe of them externally, right? Their gender. Maybe we might be able to determine what their religion is. We might determine if they're young or old, or what their race is. We look at something about them and we try to explain their behaviors, why they just ran into us, acted like a jerk, walked off, didn't say they were sorry. It's because they're young and they're rude. It's because they're old and they don't care. It's because maybe they're a man and they're whatever the thing is we have going on in our head, right? And yet, if we reverse the roles and we're the one who was walking down the street and bumped into somebody and we didn't say we were sorry, and we were on our cell phone, and someone stopped us and said, why did you just do that? Why didn't you say you were sorry? You might say, oh, I was talking to my mom, or my dad just went into the hospital, or just found out my wife went into labor, or I'm having we have all these internal reasons. We have all these personal reasons why we think it was okay for us to have done what we just did. So whenever we go to talk to someone about a behavior that we want to change, they will always have an internal reason as to what is driving their beliefs, what's driving their decisions, what's driving their actions. And if we're not careful, we will look at them with external filters. and say, well, it's because, I mean, how many times have you heard, oh, young people don't want to work hard, or young people don't want to do this? So many times we put this young person filter on that they just don't want to do certain things, and yet they all become managers, they get older, and then we don't have those same kind of things there. We throw it to the next generation down the line. So we have to be really, really careful as leaders that we don't make external judgments about somebody. We instead need to focus on what's happening with them internally. What is it? What's the story they're telling themselves? What's going on in their lives? What is it that they might be worried about or dealing with that's causing that behavior? It's not because they're a man or a woman. It's not because they are this race or that race. It's not because they're young or old. We need to go back to their story, what was the internal reasons. And we also need to make sure that as leaders, we're sharing our internal reasons when we're talking to our staff so that they don't make external judgments about us as well, that they understand why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. Next one. The next one is the halo effect. Now, as leaders, we have to be really, really careful about the halo effect. So there's a couple ways we can look at this one. The first one is if there was a really kind of a cool study I remember reading where they had people go into two identical cars, and they had them go into the first car and they had them listen to the radio and rate how good the stereo system was. And then they had them go into the same identical car next over with the same exact radio in it, but they told them that this is the sound system that Brad Pitt uses. And then they asked them to rate that stereo quality. And everyone rated it better. Everyone said it was better because when they found out it was Brad Pitt's stereo, it must be better. Because they think Brad Pitt is someone who is successful or someone who is attractive or whatever it is, they have this very high opinion of this person. They assume that their work or their decisions or the things they do are better. This is why we put celebrities in Rolex commercials and perfume commercials and all this stuff, because we assume that they know better. Right? This is this halo effect happening. This also happens with our star performers. Someone can do a good job for us, and we think that they're going to do a great job in some other role or in some other project, when that may not be the case. Just because they did good one place doesn't mean they might do good in another. So we want to be really careful there. We also want to be careful that we're not promoting or paying more attention to someone who we think is more attractive or dresses nicer at work. That's also part of the halo effect. We want to make sure we're putting in good measurements, that we're fairly and adequately measuring everyone's performance based on their output, based on what they're doing, not how good they look or how snappy they dress. It's nice if they dress nice to work. That's great. But that shouldn't be the reason we're giving someone more projects or a promotion. We have to look at real data and understanding, did they really meet their goals? Are they being successful? Are they helping the organization? As our fundamental way to decide what to do. Next one. And then we have the availability heuristic. So what this cognitive bias says is that recent information, new information that we've learned, we tend to value more than old information. I'm sure if all of you went to a party tonight and you had a glass of wine in your hand, you would probably talk about some article you read or some thread on Reddit or maybe this webinar you went to today. You're not going to talk about what you learned in biology class freshman year, right? I mean, we're not going to go back to this old data. So we tend to value new data first. That can be good when we want to innovate and we want to think about new ideas, but can also be really bad if we're constantly chasing the newest thing and we're ignoring really good, tried and true best practices or things that we know actually work. So be really careful that your team and that you aren't always chasing the next best thing and the shiny star. We need to sort of balance that against good traditional things that we know work, things that we can rely on, and then experiment with new things and test them against old and decide whether or not we should move forward or make any changes. Okay, next slide. So the next one, it really surprised me, and this one is the are they physically ready? So a lot of these cognitive biases, a lot of things I'm talking about today, come from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They're two of the most famous scientists. They're from Israel. They spent a lot of time in America. Emil Tversky has passed away, but Andrew Kahneman's still alive. He's won a Nobel Prize for his work in this. If you're interested in any of the things I'm talking about today, The Undoing Project is a fantastic book to read. They also wrote their own version of this called The Undoing Project, called Thinking Fast and Slow. That one, it does not read fast. It reads very slow. So I suggest The Undoing Project. But all these sort of stories and different bits of data are in there, and they're fascinating. So they wanted to understand, why do people make decisions? How do they go about that? And what are the reasons that might be impacting decision making? So they said, let's go study judges in Israel, specifically parole judges. Why do parole judges say yes to some people to get out of prison? And why do they say no to other people? And what they found was fascinating. It turns out that the hungrier the judge was, the more likely they were to say no. So in the morning, right after breakfast, first case, you were in the high 90 percentiles to get a yes. And the closer you moved to lunch, you were down into the 90 percentiles to get a no. Right before lunch, most people got a no, almost always. Came back from lunch, the curve started again. You were almost always going to get a yes. And it slowly moved to more and more no's as it went down to the end of the day. The last case or two of the day almost always got no's. Can you imagine whether or not you would get out of prison is based on whether or not the judge is hungry? It's like that Snickers commercial, right? You ever seen that, where they tell you, hey, you're getting grumpy, you need to eat a Snickers? That's an actual thing. It's a real thing. So what can we learn from that as leaders? First, don't bring people together for a really important meeting where you need to make decisions, or you need to get people on board at 11:30, right before they're supposed to go eat lunch, and expect them to be good decision makers. It's not going to happen. If you have to do that, we'll bring in pizza, or ask everyone to do a working lunch, or something. And this is why salespeople take their clients out to dinner, and that's when they get the contract signed, because they've eaten, and now they're more likely to say yes. The data says they're more likely to give their default answer. And for most of us, our default answer when we're hangry, as someone put in the chat, is no. So we can really protect against this to make sure that we are not asking people to really stretch their brains and make good decisions when they're hungry, by changing when we might have those meetings, or making sure that people have snacks or whatever. I mean, I used to have it would be like a snack and soda 3 o'clock meeting with my senior team sometimes, and they thought it was funny I called it that, but they were eating something, and then we would talk about really hard stuff at like 3 o'clock. They were all had that little 3 o'clock dip, right? And I knew they were going to be exhausted. The same thing happens with temperature. Now, what's awesome about remote work or hybrid work is if you're in a place where you control the thermometer, or the temperature gauge, we don't necessarily have that problem. But in a lot of environments, you'll notice employees, some are walking around in shorts and a tank top, and others have like 3 jackets on and a blanket, and they're freezing to death. And so if people are too hot or too cold, they will go into the same decision-making problem, where if their brain is spending time thinking about I'm too hot or I'm too cold, they can't spend the time they need to think about making good decisions, or thinking about something new, or breaking through their preconceived ideas. Okay, next slide. The next one is group thought. So we notice a lot of challenges with group thought, or both in people can kind of want to go along with the group just to be liked or to be accepted. There's a lot of people who are introverted, maybe newer, they're not as senior in the organization, they feel like they don't have the power or the ability to disagree. And so they'll just go along with the group, even though it's a terrible idea what the group's talking about. So if you're concerned about this as a leader, and you want to train your people to make sure they feel comfortable telling you what they think, that you want to hear their opinion, even if the whole group thinks it's a good idea, then we need to coach them in a very specific way. So the first thing we do is we want to ask them to come to their own conclusions about something before they consider the conclusions of others. Now, that sounds counterintuitive to what we've always heard, to be open-minded, to listen to other people's opinions. We do want that, but we want them to first think about what their conclusion is. What do they think is best? What do they want to do? Then be open to other people's opinions. What happens is we don't actually come to our own conclusions. We think about everyone else's, and 9 out of 10 people want pizza today, and we give it and say, fine, let's have pizza, even though you really wanted tacos, right? You didn't really think about what you wanted, and so you go along with everybody else. So this is a really important shift for employees, is to take the time to really think the problem through and decide what, if they were given the solo decision, what would they do? So they have the strong enough opinion to talk about that with the rest of the team. Okay, next bullet point there. If they don't feel like they can do that, if they need more help and more coaching, I've given some of my really junior people and some of my most introverted people some of these strategies to really help them. And the first one is to ask permission to disagree. So if they feel like everyone's got it wrong and they have a different opinion, they can ask everyone, hey, do you mind if I disagree with you for a second? Would that be okay? This is a great way to handle maybe someone who's really extroverted, maybe someone, a senior leader who's really confident and totally sure this is the way we should go. Hey, would you mind if I just disagreed with you for a second? Can I be the devil's advocate here? I've never seen anyone say no. They always go, oh yeah, sure, you're right. Let's tell me what you think. And now they have given you that permission. They're less likely to be upset with you or argue because they've said it's okay, right? And if you're still not comfortable with that, the next bullet point is say, hey everyone, I'm sure you're right. We should all have pizza today, even though this is the 9th time we've had pizza this month. I'm sure you're right, but what if we didn't get pizza today? What else would we do? Let's just pretend that pizza isn't going to work. What else would we do? And that's when you start to get everyone else to do your job for you, to start giving suggestions, to say, oh, we could have tacos, we could have Chinese food, we could have this. And you may find the group on its own, just because you've asked this what if question and what else, comes to a better conclusion without you having to be the thorn in their side to say, hey, you're not right, this doesn't work, we shouldn't do this, right? It's just to ask these open-ended clarifying questions to get people to have vision about what else we would do. Next slide. The other thing that we can do as leaders to really change and make sure that we are hearing and understanding our people is to ask them questions, right? Is to survey them. But what I hate the most is the annual survey. Waiting an entire year to get someone's opinion, taking 3 months to figure out the data, and another 3 months to come up with solutions, and by then we've lost them, it's too late. The whole set of problems have changed or people have left the company. What we used to do, so in smaller organizations, you can do this with everyone. In big organizations, you might just do this with a division or with a smaller group. I would say the maximum is 50 in a group. The minimum might be 10 or 12. But if you have 5,000 people in your company, we'll try to break it down into divisions. But we asked one question every week. And what this did was allowed us to get good data. How are we doing? What's working? Where should we be focusing our attention with? What are we not seeing? Who's really killing it right now for us? What clients should we be worried about? Where could we improve? We asked these really important, but one question, right? What do you wish management knew? What do you wish a brand new employee knew? Like these kinds of really simple questions, and we would get back. I mean, this is like a one question, one line, and I would get back paragraphs from people. We would get 95% survey completion rate from our staff. Usually only people that didn't do it were sick or on vacation, because I was just asking one question every week. And over time, they knew we were going to address their concerns. We were going to do something with that data because it was easy to do. It was just once a week. Now, what I kind of over time, I evolved this survey where for a period of time, I would tell them, all of your answers are completely confidential. I'm the only one that's going to read them. I may repeat the sentiment of what was said, but I'm never going to show anyone the text. So no one knows it was you. So you don't put your name on it, but I'm never going to show anybody because I would ask some really hard-hitting questions that maybe they'd be afraid to answer. Other times I would say for the next few months, all of these questions I'm going to share with everybody. So everyone's going to get all the data from all the questions. So I might ask them, hey, what's going great? Who in the company has really been helping us? Who's the unsung hero this week? And that's the kind of thing I would want to share with everyone so everyone could see it, right? So it was a really important tool to make sure that, remember, listening was one of my cultural pillars. This is a great way as a leader to make sure you're listening to your people, that there is a channel and there's a specific way that you're going to hear them and get data from them by asking one great question every week. Next slide. So we talked a little bit more about listening. Kind of want to give you a little bit more in depth here. So go ahead and click to the bullet points there, Carrie. So we want to make sure we do that weekly survey versus annual. We can even put in things called listening labs. If you have a larger organization, you might want to think about having people come together once a month to talk about what's going on in the organization or ask specific questions to kind of get a baseline of how the organization is feeling about things. Making sure we're asking people what they think they heard. Okay, what is it you heard in this meeting? Or telling your people, hey, in this meeting, this is what I think I heard. Did I get this right? Is that what I should have heard? So we want to make sure that we're really checking in on that and asking, is that right? Did I get this right? That was a habit that I had, as I would have, especially if I was a new leader in a new organization, I would ask people to tell me what they heard, and I would repeat back what I heard and ask them if that's right. And I would not leave that meeting until I felt like we got it, so that we felt much more connected and they felt safer and had that psychological safety that I was going to get it right with them. And before I moved forward, we were all on the same page. Next slide. The next one is saying yes. So imagine if for the rest of the week, you all had to say yes to every single question that was asked of you. Yes, there is that Jim Carrey movie that sort of did this thing. It's a fun movie, and that actually comes from an old comedian's bit from England. It was actually not whoever did the Jim Carrey movie was just sort of stealing that. And this comes even deeper from improv. So if you've ever been in improv comedy or seen improv comedy, the rule is you have to say yes. So if you're in an improv scene with someone and they have this imaginary thing in their hand, here is a bag on fire. You can't say, no, that's a frog. That ends the scene. You have to say, yes, it's on fire and it's going to burn me. You have to say yes to what they're doing to keep that scene, that thing moving. It's the same thing at work. Someone comes to you. They have passion. They have a spark. They have an idea. Hey, I really want to try this thing. And if you say, no, we tried that last year, it doesn't work, go away, right? You're going to squash them. You're going to squash their innovation, their desire to want to bring you new ideas. You can just say, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's give that a try. Hey, we tried that last year, but let's talk through this, and maybe there's a new way we can think about doing this. And if you feel like saying yes to everything might be difficult for you, I'll give you a couple ways to protect yourself. First, don't tell everyone you're going to say yes to everything. That's probably a pretty good start. And then you can use yes and yes but. So if usually the thing that managers always say to me is, well, what if someone asks for a raise? And then you should say yes, but this is how we do raises. Maybe it is an annual review. Maybe you have to, reach 80% of your goals. Like, wouldn't it be nice if every employee knew exactly the things they needed to do to be able to get that raise or to get that promotion or whatever it is that they're hoping for? How do we say yes, and how do we help them achieve that? If that's a completely unknown process and there's no measurement around that, I mean, that's pretty demoralizing for people. So there's a way to say yes. The extreme is one time someone said, well, what if your employee said, hey, let's go make meth in the basement? And I could say yes, but you have to go get the law changed because that's illegal. Right? I could still say yes to that terrible, terrible idea, but I can use that but to carve out. Right? I didn't have to say no, even though no is the correct answer there. I could say, but you have to go get the law changed. And we know that's not going to happen, so we don't have to worry about it. All right, next slide. So that's it. If anyone wants to connect with me on TikTok or Instagram, I have lots of content there. Happy to do that. And then I would certainly love to answer any questions, or if anyone has any thoughts or specific things happening inside the organization they'd love to bring up today, we can talk about it. So I don't know if there's another slide there, but might have all my contact information's everywhere. So yeah, let me pull up the chat here and yeah. Thank you. Who had a question?
Charles going? I'll go after Charles.
Excuse me. Thank you. Chris, I was just thinking as you said yes, that I was just getting excited about the fact that the other day I heard that Elon Musk, who's not necessarily our model leader, but he said that the greatest soft skill is the ability to say no thank you. What do you think of that compared to the yes that you just gave?
Yeah, so here's the difference, I think. If you are someone in Elon Musk's position, if you are someone who is doing a lot of things at a very high senior level, right, you have to know how to focus on the things that you need to focus on and be able to cut out the rest, right? So think of the people on Shark Tank. Think about, some of the biggest owners and senior leaders, I think it's a different experience for them to know when to say no to something because it doesn't align with what they're trying to do in their position or for their company. That in itself is completely different, in my opinion, than the average leader who has someone who's coming to them and saying, hey, I have an idea, right? Where it's middle management, need more coffee, middle management's job to say no or to buffer or whatever. So I have found it to be nothing but life-changing to say yes to things. I did this I read Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes. If you've ever read that book, it's fantastic. And I decided for an entire year I was going to say yes to every single thing. I ended up in Guatemala at a conference for 8 people with a volcano going off, and I made some of the best friends of my life. I ended up saying yes to people who wanted my time I would have said no to on LinkedIn. I said, can you give me advice? And it created opportunities for me. It was fundamentally life-changing. I guess if I was Elon Musk or I was Mark Zuckerberg or I was, Jeff Bezos, yeah, I think you have so many opportunities coming at you that you have to know how to say no and stay inside your lane in that world because the multiple is so different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks for helping me balance that out.
You're welcome. Who was next?
Critical word here. I want to ask, people come in they bring themselves, they see themselves everywhere they go. So a lot of people have bad habits that you may see depending on your experience over time. And you may see that in 8 out of 10 people come in organizations with bad habits. And then the biases you were talking about, they intend to hold on to those bad habits, and somehow you have to now not scold them like kids, but actually get them to balance the possibility of removing those bad habits or giving them up while they're in this area. How do you go about doing that gently? Okay?
Sure.
My
So, yeah, I love to use this concept called feed forward. I got this from Marshall Goldsmith. He was on my podcast a few years back, and I absolutely love it. So what you're talking about is someone might come with a bad habit, and we would typically meet with somebody in a one-on-one or a coaching session and say, hey, I noticed every time you're in a meeting that you talk too much, right? Or you're always cutting off all of the women in the room, or whatever the thing is that you're noticing is this bad habit that they're doing. And so when we give people feedback, they tend to get defensive. They tend to fall back on their belief system or whatever it is they think is going to help them win that argument. But if we change the wording just slightly, so if you came to them and said, hey, in the next meeting, can you make sure that everyone gets heard, right? Instead of saying, why are you always cutting everybody off? Or people are complaining because you talk too much or whatever it is, in the next meeting, can you make sure everyone gets an opportunity to talk? Now, they might still want to poke at that and tell you why they think they've been acting the way they've been acting, but you're framing it into forward with the future. And it's easier for someone to change their future behaviors than it is for them to ever change anything they've already done. It's too late. They've already made the mistake. They've already made the bad choice. They've already had the terrible behavior. But the next time, we can give them clear direction on what we want going forward. And I have found that to work. I mean, like in the 90 percentile, it's very high success rate in asking people. Because if they really believe that they should continue to act the way they're acting, then a good conversation tends to happen out of that. But usually they go, oh, yeah, I can do that. And if they don't, and you meet with them again and go, hey, remember we were going to work on making sure everyone gets to talk? You know, hey, what happened? What's going on there, right? And you kind of help them see that behavior and over time change. Hopefully that answers your question there.
Good.
Thanks. Any other? Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. What do you think about real-time feedback, to his point? Like, what if the manager says in the class, and maybe not in an embarrassing way, maybe privately texts or chats or Slacks or whatever, but tells the other person, hey, let's leave some room, let's leave some headspace for other people. I've seen that happen once. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, but the guy got up and left. He just... Yeah.
I think that's really, really tough to do in the moment. So if someone's behavior is so obtuse that you need to do something about it, I have called a break for the meeting and then pulled that person aside privately, right? Or made sure I ended up where they ended up during the break and just kind of said something. And that's a much softer way, because if they feel embarrassed, they feel like they're being called out in the moment, they're just going to lose it, right? They're going to get very upset. They're going to get very defensive. I mean, no one wants to be told, you know, that their behavior is not good, especially in front of people that they respect or they have to work with or whatever, right? So even if they know you're right? I mean, I've had people that, like, I know you're right, but they were still mad that you called them out on it. So again, that's why that, hey, going forward, this is what I need from you. And as a leader, if that's your position, you have that authority to do that. Say, hey, you know, as your boss, I need you to understand, I need to hear from everyone because I value everyone's opinions. And if you're the only one talking in the meeting, I can't hear everyone. And then I have to go meet with them one-on-one. Or you can find a good way to kind of twist it. If that makes sense. Cool.
Question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Culture. I have this concept of what culture and history. And a lot of times what people do, they bring their culture and they're using history to support the culture. And we need to change the culture in order to change the history. How do you get around somebody who's strong and bringing in culture from bad history, you know, and insisting that culture is good because that's the history they have? How do you get that change in an organization to change your company to better culture?
Sure. I'll try to give you the quick answer to what is probably a 5-day lecture series we could do. But the stronger and the more you are communicating what the culture is supposed to be in the organization, the harder it is for someone to bring in from the outside their version of culture and history, right? I mean, if you were suddenly, you know, went from being free out in the public and you were suddenly in prison, you would have to conform to that new culture inside of that prison to survive, right? You don't get to bring in from the outside world what's right and wrong and what happens. You're suddenly in a new, completely controlled environment. The culture shifts very clearly. Now, obviously, that's not the same as going from one job to another, but the clearer you can make it about this is what the company values, this is how we operate. Culture is the norms. It is the way we get things done, right? So if in some companies, it's a flat hierarchy. You can go to anybody. You can go talk. You can get what you need. In some companies, it's very hierarchical. You better go to your boss, who's going to go to their boss, who's going to go to their boss. That's the way they operate. We just need to be super clear with people about what is our culture, what do we value, and continue to reiterate that constantly and consistently, especially when we find behaviors that are up against that. And over time, they should do one of two things, which will help you solve your problem. They will either conform and change to align with the culture because the culture is stronger than they are, or they will leave, right? They will quit. And those are the two most likely scenarios for you. Any other questions? Wasn't sure if Ken had one there or if he was just...
Yeah, I'm going to say on that point, Chris, I found that addressing culture is always best. Like when I interview candidates, I describe the culture like right off the bat and to see if this is going to be a good fit for you. That's probably one of the most important questions I ask during an interview and try to get a feel for, because if they're not going to fit into our environment, I just know it's not going to work, regardless of their skill set and what they're bringing to the table. Mm-hmm. If they don't want to be in that environment, it's just not going to be successful for anybody.
Yeah.
I was going to say another thing too about the availability heuristic. I've always heard it called recency bias, and you were talking about it in the context of like management looking at things and chasing things and looking at using that recent information. But I've found that I do it a lot, or management does it a lot when it comes to like evaluating employee performance. They take the most recent actions that an employee does, good or bad, right? You can have an entire year of bad performance, and they finally come through in the last month on a project, and all of a sudden they're the greatest employee in the world. And vice versa, it's true. Like they've been a superstar for 11 months, and then they had one failed thing recently. And that you as a leader really focus on what is most recent in that employee's performance when you really take a look at the larger picture. So I'm glad you brought that, because I got my master's in management leadership, and I've gone through a lot of these different topics, but I think a lot of management hasn't. And there is a lot that people need to know as leaders about how other people's brains work, and including their own, because your brain is a very fickle thing, and it does a lot of things even without your knowledge. So I think this is an important topic for any leader, and it needs to be constantly reinforced and talked about.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate that. Shannon, Gabriel, Kim, Mavi, Vinny, anybody else have any questions?
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Perfect. So I have a growing team here. My first fully remote team I've ever managed. My business is growing significantly. I'm kind of in a position where I am kind of the, I guess, captain of the ship, leading everybody in my organization to include my business partner. And I struggle sometimes leading a remote team with team members showing up motivated and intentional behind their day-to-day tasks. And so obviously those days I kind of step more into a mentorship role on helping people, get motivated and have the drive to basically handle everything needed that day. I guess for me, my question is in your two books listed there, am I going to get, answers on creative ways for building the culture, managing and leading at the same time as holding people accountable to standards, and I guess all of these broad leadership topics?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the remote work book might be, if you're leading a fully remote team, that might be your best place to start. There's a couple things I can think of. I mean, one, making sure the way in which you're meeting. I mean, this is why we're here in the Ronde space today. This is a kind of a cool place to allow people to feel more connected and to help kind of reinforce an environment that you might be trying to deliver to your people. I thought of two specific things that might be something for you to think about. The first is maybe the bad news, right? it's possible that some of your people, if they are not motivated, if they're not hungry and they're not there, you having to do all this work just to get them going, they may not be the right people. There's a possibility here of misalignment with some of them, right? If they're not excited about what you're doing, I mean, yeah, we'd all rather be on the beach sipping a Mai Tai than we would being at work, but that's not realistic. So beyond that, if they're not, excited about what you're doing, do they understand it? Do they understand your purpose? Have you done enough to really sell, what the passion is about the organization, what you're doing, so that they can get behind it? That's that purpose part I talked about very early on. Or are they just the wrong people, which is possible, or some of them. But if you're not sure, or you think maybe they are, and you've done enough on the other end, then I would really spend a lot of time with recognition and really making sure you have a great way to recognize people for great work, that everyone is involved, not top down, but everyone is involved in calling people out constantly for helping someone out, doing something good. Maybe they just don't have enough recognition, and so they feel like they're doing all this work and no one sees them, and so they've kind of gotten a little bit, they need you to kind of rally them all the time to get going because, well, no one's going to notice if I did a good job or not, kind of thing. I've seen that in organizations where it's sort of this like hidden type of a Achilles heel, right? So we used to use this thing called a green flag, which was, we had it in Slack, and we asked, we constantly coach people, if you see someone did something good, they helped you, they helped someone else, they helped a client, they helped a vendor, they, won an award from volunteering in their community, whatever it is you found out about them, put it in our water cooler room, put it in our general company room, do a green flag and explain why they did something awesome and celebrate it. And it gets to be contagious for them, right? They're constantly calling each other out. There's no point system. There's no getting a free gift certificate. No one's gaming the system. This is just pure altruistic. Hey, I noticed my coworker did a great job. And you'll notice a shift in most people's behaviors and how they act. Again, if you have someone who's just missed the line and is a bad employee, that's never going to change. You're going to have to get rid of them. But assuming that that's not the case, you can see a big shift there. And certainly the book, there's 900 other types of suggestions that you might find interesting.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head with the recognition thing, because I struggle on a personal level in my own leadership ability in the dichotomy of recognizing people for silly things and just understanding that, doing your job is the expectation here every day. So I kind of struggle on trying to find a balance between those two. So I think, for me, I could go a little bit more in depth on the recognition piece of
and making sure that everyone else is doing it is what's key, because if you're already recognizing in yourself that it's just not in you to say, yay, you did your job today, you're supposed to do your job. Like, if that's not you and you're not going to get excited, then help them be the ones to help do that, so that it's not on you as the leader, right? You shouldn't be the only cheerleader in the organization. Everyone needs to be doing it.
That makes sense. I have a really, really good team. I enjoy everyone's presence here. It's actually culture is something that we really pride ourselves on. Especially when we get together once a quarter and celebrate wins and those kinds of things. But I think you're right on with that recognition more often than once every 90 days.
Yeah. I mean, before I sold my company in 2021, the water cooler room, I had to mute it, because they were every 5 or 6 minutes, somebody was saying something about somebody, which was awesome. But I couldn't get work done because it was constantly going off. Right? I had to go in there and read it once an hour. So that was, you can get to that point, right, where people are constantly patting each other on the back and they're running it. And you'll know it's contagious. People compete. They want to be the ones to celebrate somebody else. They love that feeling of being recognized. And so it's great.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Cool. We're at 9:30, so if anyone has any other questions, we can answer them. If anyone needs to go, we certainly understand. We've hit the hour here, but I'm happy to stick around if anyone else has any questions.
And thanks so much, Chris. Just wanted to note, as I tend to at the end of these, if you hit 6 or 7, you can kind of show some love and applause and no confetti. Thank you so much for the great talk.
Thank you. All right, well, I'll stick around and walk around a little bit if anyone wants to check out the Ronde space, or it'll be here, so you're welcome to do that.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.